All right, guys, for your Georgia O'Keeffe flower project, the technique that you are going to need to use is called washes, using washes. So what are washes? That's simply you take your paint and add water to make it transparent. Okay, transparent means that you can see through it. Opposite of transparent, FYI, is opaque. If the paint is opaque, that means you cannot see through it as easily. So if we look down here, this right now is more transparent. You can see through it a little bit more. This, especially up towards this edge, slightly more opaque. Not completely, but we can't see through that as easily. All right, so I've got just an example sketched out flower here on the canvas. Once you have sketched your flower on the canvas, then you need to start adding some of your base washes. Now, there's different ways to do this. Like you've seen here already, there's some places that have some layers of paint started, and they're kind of like petal by petal. Some of you may want to, especially if you have lots and lots of petals, you may want to do a wash over the whole thing. All right, that's fine. Do a wash over the whole thing. Is it an orange flower? Do an orange, light orange wash over everything. Or you might want to do petal by petal like this has been started. Let me show you a couple things about doing a wash though. So if you take some color, put it straight on the canvas, mix it there, try to do that as much as possible. Then you could take this and just paint over everything, okay? You need more paint than this, obviously, but you could just spread this out, get everything covered with transparent layer of color just as a base. And you can do this part really quick. Don't have to be very careful. Try to make sure that your sketch on the canvas is not too dark. If you have really heavy, thick pencil lines on here and you do a wash, that gray color from the pencil lines is going to mix with the color, make it look kind of dirty. So, okay, we've got a couple petals here that's covered with our wash. Now I'm going to show you a few other things. So this is still wet. Now, if I go back in there, and this is still wet, and I go in with another wash, this one I'm going to mix up in the palette for this example. So if I wanted to add some magenta here to make it more of an orangish color eventually, and both sides of these two petals are still wet, you can go along the edge of this. But you see down here, kind of bleeding across there. I know there's a glare on that, but we don't really want that to bleed across that edge. I kind of wanted this to just stay just on the right side to make this petal over here darker and this petal lighter. So if those are still both wet, you can see it happening kind of all along the edge. Let me get that glare off of there a little bit. But anyway, it's bleeding across that edge. What we want is implied line. You should be able to tell where the edge of this petal is and where this petal begins without them blurring together. So in that case, it might have been better to let this dry before I do a wash here. Keep that in mind. Usually when there's wait time for waiting for things to dry, there's probably something you can do. So you don't necessarily just have to set it aside for an hour. See if you can find a dry spot. All right, so let's try something different. Let's do a wash of our magenta color. How about here? So one thing you might want to try is doing one petal at a time and then like skip a petal. So I'm going to skip this one, do this one over here. Let's say I was going for like a slightly different color. I don't want them to bleed together. So I might just do this one over here and leave the one in between alone until these are both dry. Then I might go and paint this in so that it won't bleed color into the other two petals. Let's go to a spot that's already slightly established. Okay, so here, this is dry. We've got a nice clean edge, at least from here down. This petal, let's make that a lighter color. So we'll take some yellow, maybe a little bit of our magenta, and we'll paint that with lots of water right up to the edge of our already established petal. Not that this one's finished necessarily, but it's more finished than this one. Since this red one is not wet, my orangish paint is not blending or bleeding into it. So these first layers, you're just really trying to get some color down. Start thinking about values and shadow. But that can come later as well. Now this one, you may notice, has a fold or a curve in the petal. See how it's kind of flipped over? This is like the back side of the petal. This is like the underneath side. So eventually I might go in the underneath side and make this darker. It kind of already is because of where the paint is settling. But I might make this darker and then keep this up here a little bit lighter. If that part might be facing up towards the light a little bit more. Okay, eventually you're going to get to the center of the flower. Some of you don't have a center like this, but if you do, my recommendation is that you do a wash of the colors you want there. Add lots of water, get that covered quickly. The more water you add to it, the quicker it's going to spread out. I see a lot of students just trying to push almost dry paint all the way across the canvas. You really need to keep that paint wet if you're going to move it. All right, so we've got that established with a base color. I might later on go back in there for some details, possibly with more opaque paint. Now this is not going to work that well since that's still wet, but I might go back in and add some, sometimes it has pollen or sometimes it has little shapes of things scattered around in here. I might go back in there and add some of those with more of an opaque color rather than a wash. For some of these little textural details, don't worry about using a wash on those parts. And this is something that's going to be a process. Once you have everything covered with a layer of paint, it's by no means finished. You need to layer many transparent layers of color here. So once these are dry, I'd go back in and add maybe a layer of darker color here, maybe on this part, maybe a little bit of a lighter wash. I might go back into here, since that only has the magenta color, do a wash of yellow to make it more orange. This one's way too red if this is going to be an orange flower. So I might go back in there with a wash of yellow just to get that more of an orangish look. Think about what colors you're using. You should use a color harmony. So like this one is mostly warm colors. This is not, but again, it's mostly warm colors or maybe mostly cool colors. Maybe you use complementary colors like red and green, blue and orange, maybe yellow and violet. If you really want to, you can try doing a flower with neutral colors like gray, black, brown. Might not be the most beautiful flower ever, but you can try that if you want to. And even if you have a white flower, you're still going to use lots of color. Even a white object is going to have lots of color, especially cool colors and shadows. So lots of washes, guys. Lots of layers of transparent washes. All right, that's our goal here. And again, one more time. Once you have everything covered in color, that does not mean it's finished. That's just one layer. Your goal is to make many layers of transparent colors. By the time you're finished, you should be able to see through your last layer of color down to some of those very beginning layers that you started out with. Okay, and last thing, background. If you have any background showing, paint that, maybe paint that first. Okay, get that all established and then do your flower. Try to make it adhere to your color harmony. So if I'm using warm colors, I might stick with warm colors in the background, but maybe just lighter. Or if I'm doing warm colors, I could do cool colors. So it's almost like complementary. So maybe like a bluish background, orangish flower, that would be okay too. All right, email me if you have any questions along the way.